Hey everyone, Mercy here and welcome back to another video. Today I thought we could have just a little bit of a chat and talk through some of the books that are helping me get back into reading. I would say that over the past 5 years, my reading habits have become nearly non-existent and sporadic at best. I have very much struggled with long form media in general, and sitting down to finish, say, like a book or actually physically read something has felt nearly impossible. I do take a lot of responsibility for the fact that I feel like my attention span has just been completely shot because I definitely have developed really bad habits in terms of my news consumption and my social media usage over that, say, 5-year period. Whether that was getting overly obsessive with the news and following every headline and every update obsessively on Twitter, or whether it was just falling into escapism on Instagram or now TikTok, I just feel like I have become less of an active participant in my life, and especially in my hobbies, and turned into a mindless scrolling machine. So what I started to do in the month of May was just cut back a little bit. I tried to go cold turkey off of TikTok in particular because that is my current worst social media vice. I tried to go cold turkey off of TikTok back in November of 2022, and while it lasted for about a month and a half, when I did pick up the app again, I swear to you, I was even less able to control myself than before. So I'm not trying to go cold turkey. I don't think that works. What I am trying to do instead is just replace a little bit of that scrolling with something more active and less passive. For example, one thing I've started to do is that when I come home from work, I sit down, and rather than picking up my phone to scroll like I normally would, I have been immediately, without giving myself any other option, picking up my book. So I've been leaving my book here on the ottoman in the mornings right before I go to work, and then when I get home, I literally don't even change. I sit down, I maybe put on some music or put the ball game on in the background, and then immediately pick up my book. That alone has already started to shift my evening routine. I am no longer getting stuck in a bad scrolling cycle and delaying dinner until an absolutely ridiculously late hour of the evening. And I actually feel like I am relaxing and winding down at night before bed versus just falling asleep because I'm exhausted. Another thing that I'm attempting to do is to wake up in enough time to give myself half an hour to do something fun. Now, that something fun has varied greatly day to day so far. Some days I have gotten up and read a chapter or two. Some days I have gotten up and cleaned because I failed to clean the night before. And while that's not necessarily fun, it means that I have more time to do fun stuff in the evening rather than cleaning when I get home. I've also gotten up early to journal or just write. And I have to say, again, not a huge change, but so far really just like improves my mood for the day. It makes me feel like I'm actually taking time for myself. Again, this is not a huge change whatsoever, but it really has made me feel just a little bit more in control of my time and like I'm actually spending my free time doing something that I enjoy. Now, one of my problems when it comes to free time is that I'm a woman of many hobbies. I love doing a lot of things. I like cooking, I like sewing, I like knitting, I like drawing, I like walking, and I love reading, and obviously making videos as well. Now, obviously some of these can be combined. I would compare it to something like the concept of habit stacking, but in this case, I guess it would be hobby stacking. For instance, I do a lot of reading via audiobook as I'm walking, cooking, drawing. That's probably the thing that I can do or overlap with most other activities. However, sitting down to read a physical book has genuinely felt almost impossible over the last several years. And so in the little moments I'm kind of carving out for myself, whether that's at night right after work or because I'm trying to do like an actual book versus a screen right before bed, even in those little pockets, I feel like those have already made a huge difference in terms of starting to get back into the habit of reading, because it's a habit I very much let fall by the wayside. I should also mention that when I decided I wanted to get back into reading, like really actively try to get back into reading, I thought, didn't I already make a video about this? And lo and behold, I have. I made a video probably back in like 2017 or 2018 about how to get more into reading or how to read more. So I went and I watched that video, and I actually am taking some of my own advice. I'll mention each piece of advice, I guess, as I go through the stack of books that I'm currently reading, but I guess we'll just go top down because I have them stacked kind of all over the place here on my lap. So first of all, I thought I want to read something short because, again, attention span problems. And I thought, you know what's even shorter than a short book? A poetry collection. So I am currently reading How to Love the Empty Air by Kristen O'Keefe Aptowitz. Now, this is actually something I received for review absolute ages ago at this point. This is by Right Bloody Press, and from what I remember, they are a poetry publisher who primarily publish poems, so many P's, much alliteration, by women. I have been really enjoying this because it's kind of an autobiographical collection that follows Kristen's journey from becoming published to her mother's death and then the aftermath of that. Now, I have just reached the point of her mother's death, and I'm not sure how I feel about reading the next couple of poems because she describes her emotions so vividly and beautifully that I think this section at least might break me a little bit. But I am really, really enjoying this. I honestly normally really struggle with poetry, and this is written so accessibly. It's not complicated, it's not structurally intense, it's not at all intimidating. It very much reads like teeny little mini chapters, just in poetic language versus prose. I would definitely recommend this if you are not normally into poetry. If you like memoir, you might really enjoy this as a poetry collection. And if you maybe are a daughter who has a interesting relationship with your mother, you might also enjoy this as well. I guess between being a mood reader and then training myself to read multiple books at a time as like a lit student in college, I find it very odd to be reading only one thing at a time, even when I'm struggling to read at all. So naturally, I have picked up multiple books, and one of the things I wanted to pick up obviously was a novel. Now, not only was it a goal of mine to read more fiction this year, because I have really strayed away from fiction the last couple of years, but I also really wanted to read a novel because it has felt like an absolutely insurmountable task. So the piece of advice I reached for in my advice video was to reread an old favorite. And in my head, I thought, okay, well, let's do something short and relatively fast-paced, so maybe something middle grade. Then I realized that I own a lot of middle grade series that I have read part of, yet not all of. So maybe it would be a good idea to start with a series reread, because then if I read one book, there's naturally a continuing momentum because the story continues. I did have quite a few options for the series reread, but in the end I decided to go with the Chronicles of Narnia, and I'm really quite glad I did. These are a lot more plot driven than I remembered, and even better, they're quite short. I think the first one here, The Magician's Nephew, is about 202 pages, and I think the next one, probably the most popular, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, is, I want to say, like 198. So very quick little books to get through, and because they are children's classics, I guess technically, the language is not complicated. They are humorous and, like I said, plot driven, and I think this was like a really good idea. This book in particular I have read at least a couple of times prior to this current reread. I actually had it read aloud to me as a kid. My school was big on reading aloud to us during our handworking classes, where we were learning to sew and knit, etc., because they found that it kept us still. And I do remember reading at least Magician's Nephew through Voyage of the Dawn Treader that way for the very first time. I have read this, I think, at least 2 other times as like a slightly older reader, but for some reason this time around I felt like I was picking up on more of the humor, some of the drier, sarcastic humor, some of the like asides I found for some reason incredibly funny, and I definitely laughed quite a bit reading this. I also felt that on the slightly more negative side, the Christian allegory was even stronger than I remembered it being. Really smacks you over the head in this book, and I don't know if that's just down to me being like an older reader who's more educated in Christianity now than I was as a kid, but it did feel quite heavy-handed and yet didn't necessarily take away from my enjoyment of the book, just something I was hyper aware of. So having finished The Magician's Nephew, I am going to start at some point The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Again, this is going to be short, quick, fast-paced, and I think at the end I might treat myself to a rewatch of the, goodness, I don't know when that came out, like 2000 and something film adaptation. It's now on Disney Plus, so I think I will treat myself to a rewatch. And actually that makes me curious, do you have a favorite Chronicle of Narnia if you have read the series? Please no spoilers. I have not yet read the last 2 books of the series, which makes me actually a little bit nervous because I had a colleague ask if I had read the series in its entirety when I mentioned I was rereading it. And when I said no, he just kind of gave me a sad look, and I don't know what that means. I don't know what that's leading to. But if you do have a favorite chronicle, leave me a comment below. I would be interested to know. Per usual, I am working my way through an audiobook at the moment, and that is the memoir Spare by Prince Harry. Now, this memoir caused quite a stir earlier this year. I feel like everybody and their grandmother was reading it. There were news stories about it everywhere, and I do have incredibly mixed feelings about the memoir so far. I do have about 4-ish hours to go, and we kind of just hit the Meghan Markle section of his life, if you will. So I don't really have much to say in regards to that yet, but man, has this memoir been a whirlwind. I very much felt like I went into it feeling like I needed to pick a side. Was I on Harry's side or the Crown's side, so to speak, the institution side? And so far I remain... There's children outside, sorry. So far, I remain incredibly torn. On one hand, I do feel bad for him, I guess, as somebody who didn't ask to be thrust into the limelight, as somebody who didn't ask to live his life publicly and have every, waking moment be fodder for the absolute circus that is the British press. On the other hand, it's hard to listen to him say things like, oh, I was bored so I escaped to Scotland, or I flew back and forth to Africa every other month for, diversion, and not think, but aren't you doing that on the taxpayer's dime? Isn't that a privilege that comes with the oddness of your position as a prince in 2023? So I don't know how I feel about it. I do feel like this was very much his attempt at, if I just publish all of my dirty laundry myself, the press will have nothing else to rag me on. And yet sometimes I feel like I didn't need to know all that he was willing to share. It is actually relatively well written, and I would be curious to see if he had a ghostwriter. I'm actually not sure. I haven't really done any research into the writing or the backstory of the memoir, if you will. But I will be curious to hear or listen my way through this next portion and kind of draw, I guess, a final conclusion then. And then lastly, I have started a new British mystery series, and this is by far the book I am enjoying the most. This is The Killings at Badger's Drift by Caroline Graham. Now, if you are a fan of British mystery TV shows, you might know this series because it was the inspiration for the series Midsummer Murders. Now, I have been wildly addicted to the show since about mid-May. I am trying to pace myself through the episodes, but it's basically impossible. So the show and the book series star Detective Chief Inspector Tom Barnaby, who lives in the, I guess, like semi-metropolitan city of Cawston in the county of Midsummer. He is accompanied on all of his case journeys by Detective Sergeant Gavin Troy, and together they solve mysteries in and around the various villages within the county of Midsummer. This book is actually the inspiration for episode 1 of series 1 of the show, which I have watched twice now, and I don't think any of that is taking away from my enjoyment of the book. This is definitely one of those cases where the show and the book are different enough that you can enjoy what is essentially the same story with slight deviations, equally in both different forms. It's also the second book to prove to me that I might have been wrong all of those years when I was being super rigid about always reading the book first and then enjoying the film or TV adaptation. I did the same thing with Slow Horses, where I watched that show first and then read the book. And honestly, I don't think it ruins anything for me. Even though this is a mystery that is very much dependent on twists and turns and surprises, again, there's enough variation that I don't know, I might start watching shows more often. If anything, it might be a fantastic way to start weeding out book series that I'm just not going to enjoy. If I'm not enjoying the film or the show, why on earth would I even bother attempting to read the book? And it might be a lower stakes way to do that, given that obviously it takes quite a bit more time and energy to read the book versus watching a show, which I normally do, like while I'm eating dinner. Now, when it comes to the book itself, I'm absolutely flying through it, and I don't think that has anything to do with the fact that I am already generally aware of the plotline. Graham's writing style just really sucks you in, and it is so easy to read. And yet at the same time, this is the first book I've read in absolute years where I felt the need to sit with my phone and my dictionary app open, because she has this way of very naturally describing a scene and yet sprinkling in these little words that I'm like, what does that mean? And when I look it up, it doesn't detract at all. Like it doesn't make me understand what she's trying to say less if I hadn't looked up the word, but having looked up the word, it's like given just a little extra dimension to her writing and tickled that little like writer part of my brain that I kind of forgot existed. This is also absolutely hilarious if you are into, similar to the C.S. Lewis books, into dry, sarcastic British humor. I have genuinely laughed several times reading this aloud. I will say that the dynamic between Troy and Barnaby in the book is quite different than it is in the show. In the show, I think they play Troy a lot younger than he probably is in the book, and Barnaby is, I think, less of a stick in the mud in the show than he is in the book. There's a little bit more tension here, I would say, between those two main characters. When I realized that in about chapter 3 or 4, I was honestly a little bit concerned, because I think my favorite thing about the series, aside from all of the twists and turns in the mystery, of course, is the dynamic between those two main characters. However, I don't think it has detracted from my enjoyment of the book at all. If anything, I like this version of their relationship as well, and I just kind of, I guess, think of them as like two possible relationships between the same characters in two alternate universes, if that makes sense. I'm very, very glad that I decided to pick this series up. I'm going to continue to read the rest of the series. I believe there's 7 books. I think my library has most of them, but I might have to treat myself. I may have to treat myself to purchase these for my own personal library, because I have a feeling these will be books that I would love to go back to at some point. As I was editing, I realized that I completely neglected to add a trigger warning for homophobic language and attitudes when it comes to both the show Midsummer Murders and the book The Killings of Badger's Drift. Unfortunately, Sergeant Troy does use homophobic language in both the book and the show, and it's just generally pretty clear that he's very uncomfortable around both gay men and lesbians. Thankfully, this isn't an attitude that is kind of embraced by the book or by the other characters. In fact, Barnaby is always super quick to call him out when he is being bigoted or small-minded, and the gay characters themselves are very much, at least in the show, empowered to kind of punch back at him and kind of confront him about his attitude. And while I haven't yet read enough of the book series to comment on any character arc there, in the show at least, Troy definitely becomes more open-minded and more accepting as the seasons go on. You can very much see that it's part of his character arc, if you will. It's almost kind of a bit of a plot point in the terms of it is part of him being kind of young, brash, and inexperienced at the beginning, and then the more he experiences, the more kinds of people he comes in contact with, the more accepting he gets as time goes on. So this is not me excusing that behavior at all or that language, but I did just want to flag that in case that is something that you try to avoid in your media altogether. I wanted to make sure that I included a trigger warning. Oh, and I should say that one of the reasons I picked up the book is that another piece of advice I had offered in that previous How to Get Into Reading video was to read adaptations or read movie novelizations. And while I guess technically the book was the original pre the show, I did discover the book through the show. So good advice, past Marissa. All right, so these are all the things that I have been reading recently. And honestly, for somebody who was really struggling to read about like 4 weeks ago, I feel like I've done pretty well here. I'm honestly genuinely really enjoying everything that I'm reading, and you know what? That's the best start to this rediscovery journey that we could have made. So good on me, I guess. If you're currently reading anything that you're really enjoying, please feel free to let me know about it in a comment below. And better yet, if you have ever gone through an extended reading slump, what did you do to get out of it? Do you have any advice or any books in particular that really helped pull you out? Please, again, let me know. I feel like at some point I'm gonna hit a skid. So I think it might be very helpful advice. But anyways, that is all I have for you today. I'm sweating here in the sun, so we're gonna wrap it up. Thank you so very much for watching. I hope you're having a fantastic day. I hope your reading is going well, and I will hopefully see you in the next video. Bye.